So what we see happening in the early mature Kamakura Bakufu, the one that is controlled by the Hojo, in all but name, is that you're starting to see emerging a government, an entity, with control over the lives of warriors without necessarily bothering to control other aspects of life in Japan. Which is to say, essentially, that this doesn't displace the civilian government. This is a government of warriors, for warriors, or over warriors, that is imposed over the existing civilian government. It was a system of dual rule. You had two capitals, Kyoto, the civilian capital, and Kamakura, the warrior capital. And both sent out officials, as we shall see. The emperor was a source of legitimacy for this samurai government, absolutely. The emperor invested the Minamoto shogun, and then later people who were adopted and became Minamoto that way, with the office of Seitai shogun, and that was very important. It was a relationship between the emperor and his warrior class that essentially recognized in some way the rights of both. The emperor not only had the right to exist, the emperor must exist, and the samurai certainly must also exist to protect the emperor. Nevertheless, slowly, and certainly even during this period, it becomes clear that the power of warriors is fast on its way to eclipsing the power of the civilian government. It didn't destroy it overnight, though. Emperor can grant, or not can, did grant, Yoritomo the right to appoint provincial administrators that basically were answerable to Yoritomo, and to appoint especially provincial military governors and estate overseers and estate policemen. The shogun had the right to go down to the level of the individual estate, no matter who owned it, and appoint the people who were going to be there in order to oversee that estate, and of course in the process squeeze off a fat profit for themselves. But this was a very important, certainly a very important right that the shogun had. But then again, the civilian bureaucracy kept appointing its own officials. It kept appointing its own governors, who then had all sorts of people who worked for them and kind of depended on their authority to get things done at the local level. So it's really an overlap of two spheres of operation. Certainly, when I say that the government of Kamakura was a government of warriors for warriors, I don't mean to say that they had absolutely no impact on the lives of people who weren't warriors. They had tremendous impact. Certainly in the case of Shoin estates, which was still how a lot of the agricultural produce of Japan kept being produced at this time. Who your overseer is really depends, or really has a lot to do with how your life is as a peasant. But the aim of the Kamakura government was essentially control over military affairs, control over things having to do with warriors, and if they happen to affect other areas of Japanese life, well, that's just what happens. The 1232 Joei Code was that code I talked about a little bit earlier, where the relationships between different kinds of samurai were established. The relationship between samurai and the land was certainly spelled out, and samurai could now own land. And even so, the power of the Bakufu and the imperial court was even more complicated. Essentially, the court still had more control over what happened in Western Japan, and the Bakufu had more control over what happened in eastern Japan. So there was that divide as well. And of course, as I mentioned earlier, the civilian administrators are still very much there. So I want to now not really take a detour, but to also consider in our discussion of the early Kamakura Bakufu the changes that were taking place in the culture of Japan, and how these changes then were reflected in changes in the culture of the samurai. The Kamakura period was a period of intense religious ferment and innovation. And of course, as we saw during the last lecture, Buddhism was very important in samurai life overall. So it is certainly no accident that when the religious life of Japan really underwent drastic changes, many of these changes can be observed in the culture of the samurai. The late 12th century, as I said before, was a time of civil war. It was a time of fighting. It was a time of collapse of authority. And in many ways, this had been brought about because aristocrats were now very willing to settle their disputes by force. It was a collapse of civility. And this was reflected in many different ways in society. When there's war, life becomes more uncertain. Life becomes oftentimes cut short when there's a rampaging army going through your town. You get conscripted to do all sorts of service for local armies. They might make trouble. And there was a sense that the political events in Japan were the collapse of political authority, the collapse of civility. They were really symptoms of something much greater. They were symptoms of what people started to refer to as the end of the law, mappo. And this is not just the law of human beings here on Earth. This is, in a sense, the laws of the universe. So Buddhism is in many ways predicated upon self-cultivation, to behave in a virtuous way in order that you may become enlightened. You would not become attached to any earthly pleasures, or you'd enjoy them, but you wouldn't keep seeking them out. Then this period of instability, people being horrible to each other, something must be going wrong, people thought. Many people did anyway. There's something about the fundamental laws of the universe that are breaking down, essentially. It is no longer possible, many of them believed, to attain enlightenment by cultivating yourself if the world around you was so profoundly corrupt, so unworthy of living in, where people were just horrible to each other all the time, that the end time must be coming near. And the end of the world was well and truly upon you. People did start to believe in that. Some of this certainly is because of the incessant warfare, and a lot of it is also because of contacts with Asia. I mean, this is not something that is unique to Japanese religious thought, but the flow of ideas from the continent, the innovations of local Japanese religious leaders. Well, anyway, we'll get into what they believed in a little bit. But it led to this belief that the laws had fundamentally shifted, and Buddhism began to adapt. Traditional Buddhism that was around in the Heian period, something like Tendai, for example, the Tendai sect, was very much based upon study. This is a mandala. There are all sorts of Buddhas and Bodhisattvas here. Each one of them is good for certain things. You said certain prayers to some of them. You read certain sutras to become familiar with these tasks or these properties of theirs. And in doing so, you cultivated yourself, and you would eventually achieve nirvana and cease to be reborn. This is a type of Buddhism that is, it's really difficult for lay people to get into. You have to have a lot of free time. You have to have a lot of money, frankly, to study these kinds of esoteric practices and beliefs in your own time if you were a lay person, or you had to enter a monastery, basically, and devote your life to it. Kind of overstating the fact, but basically this kind of Buddhism required a great deal of investment of time, certainly, and other things besides. And now you have the situation where there is Mappo, right? The law is collapsing, the fundamental law of the universe. It is no longer possible to cultivate yourself because the world is so depraved. So what do? You're not actually screwed, as people started to preach. The religious establishment at the time began to include amongst its most influential members monks like Shinran, for example, people who espoused a set of ideas that historians later referred to as Amidism. And religious scholars and people who study this thing. Of course, this is an English translation of this phenomenon, but basically it was a belief promulgated by some people that since the world had become so depraved, we should not seek salvation necessarily through studies of a lot of really esoteric texts. What you really needed to do is to focus on simple teachings and teachings that allowed for entry into heaven, essentially into this thing called the Western Paradise, that allowed for you to be saved even if you were depraved, even if you were a slave to sin and things like that. All you had to do was to remember, these people said, and there's a lot of variety in the Amidist sects in Japan. There's Pure Land, there's New Pure Land sect, there's quite a few others, where you, excuse me, oh yes, of course, you remember the vow of the Amida Buddha. Who is the Amida Buddha? The Amida Buddha is a certain Buddha who has so much compassion for you that he has made a vow. And this vow is that he will see you get into the promised land. The promised land, rather, the Western Paradise, basically, a heaven. Now, what you have to do to take advantage of his vow differs from Amidist sect to Amidist sect, but a dominant idea that most of them share is that you should chant what is called the Nembutsu. The Nembutsu is basically a short incantation that goes like this: Namu Amida Butsu. And what that means is, I believe in the vow of the Amida Buddha. And if you say it with a heart that is full of real belief that this Buddha will take you with him to Western Paradise, even though you don't deserve it, then you will be saved. Then again, there's some sects who say that, well, you know, Amida Buddha is so compassionate that you just need to say the Nembutsu once in your life, and you don't even necessarily have to believe it because, you know, he's so nice, he's going to take you anyway. Then there are other sects who go even further and say that, there really is, no matter what you do, you're going to be saved because Amida Buddha is so compassionate, so you might as well just dance. there used to be literally just these strings of dancing people that used to go from village to village, whipping up religious frenzy during this Kamakura period, because people were so happy that they were going to be saved by the Amida Buddha. It's a form of Buddhism that is much, much, much more easy for common people to get into. The entry barrier is quite low, quite low. Other types of religious innovation were also present during the Kamakura period. The Lotus Sutra sect well, not a sect, a direction almost of Buddhism, including Nichiren Buddhism and a few other sects, also believes in simplicity, except instead of believing in the vow of the Amida Buddha, they believe in what is called the Lotus Sutra, a particular sutra in the Buddhist tradition, which people like the monk Nichiren believed was so perfect that all you had to say is, I believe in the Lotus Sutra, and then you'd go to paradise. And then there were other Buddhist traditions as well. Zen came into, in a very real serious way, came into Japan during the Kamakura period. Zen is a type of Buddhism that is predicated on also on self-discipline, and there's certainly an emphasis on cultivation of the self in Zen. Except if I can reduce it to put it in a very small nutshell, basically Zen is not necessarily about studying these esoteric texts. Zen is more about meditation. Zen is about attaining enlightenment, to be sure, but from a much more heavy commitment to basically developing, ceasing to think. You can see this as a difference between traditional Tendai art, right, this mandala, and Zen, right, a circle, right. Zen monks used to train their disciples by through koan, these sayings, of course, you've heard this one, what is the sound of one hand clapping, things like that, which are supposed to awaken you to the absurdity and the kind of illusionary nature of the world around us. And all of this religious change had a profound impact on samurai culture. Many samurai were drawn to Zen. It is a religion that demands heavy cultivation of the self, demands discipline, lots of meditation, lots of depriving yourself of petty things that really don't matter, ephemeral pleasures, things like that. So many samurai certainly found that very compatible with their identities as these tough warriors. But it must be said that overall it was Amidist Buddhism that captured the religious allegiance of most samurai. And I think this makes a lot of sense. If you're a samurai, you might not really, your hands are probably not the cleanest. You've killed a lot of people. At least a lot of them did. And so you were very happy to essentially get this enter paradise essentially for free card. And many samurai gravitated towards that.